Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio from Monday, January 22nd, 2024. It's the last full day of campaigning before the New Hampshire presidential primary for the remaining two major Republican candidates, former President Donald Trump and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, and they are sharpening their attacks against each other. On the Democratic side, President Joe Biden is not on the New Hampshire ballot, sticking with the Democratic National Committee's plan to put South Carolina's primary first. But challenger Dean Phillips, Minnesota congressman, is making the rounds in the Granite State. President Biden today at the White House highlighting abortion rights on this anniversary of the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision that had legalized abortion in 1973. That was before the Dobbs decision just short of 2 years ago that struck that down and gave each state the power to make its own abortion laws. Senator Chris Smith, Democrat of Connecticut, a negotiator on U.S. border security, says a deal between Republicans and Democrats is largely done, although how to spend the money is still being worked out. Any such agreement on border security expected to be added to President Biden's request for aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. White House spokesman John Kirby getting more questions today about President Biden's view on whether Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has fully ruled out supporting an independent Palestinian state. And Dexter Scott King has died. He was the youngest son of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. Associated Press reporting from Manchester, New Hampshire. As the last major challenger in Donald Trump's way, Nikki Haley is hoping New Hampshire voters feel so strongly about keeping the former president away from the White House that they turn out to support her in large numbers. It's an uphill battle for the former UN ambassador and South Carolina governor. Most conservatives want to give Donald Trump another chance at beating President Joe Biden, despite Donald Trump's 2020 election loss and the 91 felony charges he faces in 4 separate indictments. With voting about to begin in New Hampshire, almost every top Republican is lined up behind Donald Trump, and polls in New Hampshire suggest he leads Nikki Haley in a state uniquely suited to her strengths. That was Associated Press reporting today. Nikki Haley made a stop in Franklin, New Hampshire, and talked about the attacks that Donald Trump has leveled against her.
We're going to give everybody an America that they can be proud of. Now, I have seen all the commercials that you've seen. And I've seen the mail that you've been reading. And every single thing that Donald Trump has said or put on TV has been a lie. Check with the fact checkers. Every single thing. He says, I want to cut Social Security and raise the retirement age. I never once said that. Not once. If anything, we're going to make it solvent so that no one lives in fear. He said that I don't want to have a border wall. I never said that. I said you can't just do a border wall. You got to do all these other things that are going to stop what's happening at the border. He says that I love war. Quite the contrary. You don't have a husband that's in the military and love war. You are obsessed with preventing war. That's what happens when you do that. But if he's going to lie about me, I'm going to tell the truth about him. And that is the fact that he needs to answer to why does he want to raise the retirement age to 70? Why, as president in 2018, did he propose a 25-cent per gallon gas tax increase on all of us? Why didn't he do anything to take care of the fentanyl flow in China? And everybody talks about the economy that Trump gave us and how good it was. And it was. But at what cost? He put us $8 trillion in debt in 4 years. Our kids are never going to forgive us for letting that happen. So let's talk about the truth. When you go out on Tuesday, you're going to decide, do you want more of the same or do you want something new? Now, I always speak in hard truths. I voted for Donald Trump twice. I was proud to serve America in his administration. But rightly or wrongly, chaos follows him. Y'all know I'm right. Chaos follows him. And we can't have a country in disarray and a world on fire and go through 4 more years of chaos. We won't survive it. And more than that, 70% of Americans have said they don't want a Trump-Biden rematch. The majority of Americans disapprove of Trump and Biden. And look at what they're doing. When you hear Trump speak, What's he talking about? Grievances? The past? He's talking about vendettas? Today he's in court? Biden's talking about investigations? Neither one of them is talking about the future. I'm doing this because I don't want my kids to live this way.
Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley in Franklin, New Hampshire today, one day before the New Hampshire presidential primary. Donald Trump, another Republican presidential candidate, had planned to spend the day in New York City, as Nikki Haley mentioned, at his sexual abuse defamation trial brought by columnist E. Jean Carroll, and possibly testify. But the day's session was canceled due to a juror's illness, and the judge has now granted the request by Donald Trump's lawyer to postpone the trial until Wednesday, because he does want to testify, so he doesn't have to be there on the day of the New Hampshire primary. Donald Trump held a rally Sunday night in Rochester, New Hampshire, during which he drew distinctions between his policies and those of chief rival Nikki Haley.
The radical left Democrats are supporting Nikki for a very simple reason, because they know she's easy to beat. They came out with a poll 2 days ago where she's way down to Biden and I'm way up on Biden, and that's the way it is. She's unelectable. Nikki Haley wants to change the working class. So just think of this. So you have a nice working class, and they want to put a 23% national sales tax on everything that's purchased. Do you think that's good? Forget about middle class. How about poor people? They have to pay 23% when they buy something. While she raises, and she wants to do this, the Social Security retirement age by perhaps an extra 10 years, because she's talking about a certain life cycle. So you can labor until the day you die and then not collect a penny out of your benefits that you really are entitled to. We're not going to play with your Social Security, or we're not going to play with your Medicare. Remember that. You know, I know politicians well, because for my whole life, except for the last little while, I had the greatest life going. What the hell did I do? I got indicted more than Alphonse Capone. Can you believe it? Al Capone. If he had dinner with you, even these young ladies, didn't matter to him. He was equal opportunity. If he had dinner with you, if he didn't like you, he'd kill you. You'd be dead. This guy got indicted less than me. Do you believe it? Because I say the election was rigged. Let me tell you. And it was. And we have all the proof you need, too. If you're lucky enough to live past the retirement age of 75, I guess they go by 75 under the Nikki Haley plan. She wants to gut Medicare using the Paul Ryan scheme. You know Paul Ryan, a rhino? Like the ultimate rhino. He destroys everything. He goes on boards, and the company hasn't done so well since he's done that. But Paul Ryan used to be Speaker of the House. Not a good one. He led the Democrat ads. You know, this was the ad, the granny off the cliff. They took his policy and they say, let's do an ad where we push granny off a cliff in a wheelchair. This was not a good ad for us. That was Paul Ryan. With your vote, it's campaign, and this is on Tuesday, you can declare that the Republican Party is never going back to the days of a weak establishment candidate. Candidates who preach cutting Medicare and Social Security at home while they spend trillions and trillions of dollars on really dumb, endless wars. They never end. They go on for 22 years, 24 years.
Republican presidential candidate, former President Donald Trump in Rochester, New Hampshire, Sunday night. His final planned rally in New Hampshire before Tuesday's primary is tonight, Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern in Laconia. And he'll be joined by three of his former opponents who have now endorsed him. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, businessman Vivek Ramaswamy, and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum will have live coverage on C-SPAN radio and television. That's 9 p.m. Eastern. The ballot for Tuesday's Democratic presidential primary in New Hampshire will not have the name of President Joe Biden, because the president is abiding by the Democratic National Committee's decision to have the South Carolina primary be the first. That would be February 3rd, instead of what has been traditional the last couple of decades, Iowa caucuses and then New Hampshire primary. C-SPAN spoke with Scott Spradling, former political director of WMUR-TV in Manchester, New Hampshire, about why his state is holding the Democratic primary anyway, the campaign to have New Hampshire voters write in the name of Joe Biden, and how New Hampshire Democrats feel about not being officially first this time around.
New Hampshire has a state law that basically says we have to be 1 week ahead of any other similar type of primary election. That's why caucuses could go first, because they're structured so differently. So with President Biden skipping the state, with the Democratic National Committee trying to place South Carolina first, but the New Hampshire law staying put and keeping this process affixed with Tuesday's January 23rd New Hampshire primary date, we have this logjam, if you will. And I think if you were to stop people that are very close to the New Hampshire Democratic Party machine, Tia, I think what you would get is folks that are feeling upset, quietly feeling very frustrated, angry by what they see as a political maneuver, not one that's based on issues and perhaps race and the types of conversations that are being used to explain why this is happening. And I think from the New Hampshire perspective, what you'd hear them say is, we're playing the long game. We're going to have this election. We understand it's not sanctioned by the DNC. Dems are standing by their man, if you will. The establishment party leadership is running a very high-profile write-in effort to make sure that Dems, even though Biden's not on the ballot, write his name in on Tuesday and still vote for the president for re-election. Polls are suggesting that will be successful, that Biden will still win New Hampshire, and then I think there are probably going to be some coming-to-Jesus-type conversations at the Democratic National Convention this summer, and we'll see what happens. I would like to think that the New Hampshire vote outcome and those delegates will be accepted and embraced as likely President Biden circles the wagons to get ready for the 50-state general election strategy.
Scott Sprodling, former political director of WMUR-TV, Manchester, New Hampshire. He's now a media consultant, part of a C-SPAN interview. A story from Reuters: as New Hampshire voters prepared to cast their votes in the state's first in the nation primary Tuesday, a robocall is circulating in the state urging Democrats to stay home, using a fake audio of U.S. President Joe Biden. The call says it's important that you save your vote for the November election. Voting this Tuesday only enables the Republicans in their quest to elect Donald Trump again. The article continues. The New Hampshire Attorney General announced he's investigating what he called an apparent unlawful attempt to disrupt the New Hampshire presidential primary election and to suppress New Hampshire voters. In the audio, the Biden voice, in quotes, is heard using one of his signature phrases, "What a bunch of malarkey," and the calls included the personal cell phone number of Kathy Sullivan, a former New Hampshire ballot law commissioner and New Hampshire Democratic Party chair. That was reporting from Reuters. Here's reaction from the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, at her news conference at the White House.
There is a robocall circulating in New Hampshire that uses what appears to be fake audio of President Biden's voice. And acknowledging that's obviously a campaign issue and that the campaign itself has spoken to it, can you nonetheless talk about the concerns that the White House has about the president's likeness being used in this false manner?
So, look, as you just stated, because I always have to say that at the top, it's a robocall for an upcoming election, 2024, obviously. So I just want to be careful in that comment. But that call was indeed fake and not recorded by the president. I can confirm that. And so I just want to be really careful, since it doesn't, it is a primary election. It is a campaign. Don't want to speak too much about that. Look, more broadly, as we talk about deep fakes, the president has been clear that there are risks associated with deep fakes. Fake images and misinformation can be exacerbated by emerging technologies, and that's why this president has directed the Department of Commerce through the AI Safety Institute at NIST to help develop clear watermarking and content standards. So that's important. But again, to your question on this robocall, that was not the president. That was fake, and it was certainly not recorded by this president.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at her news conference at the White House. More from the article from Reuters. The campaign for former President Donald Trump said it was absolutely not involved in the robocall. The campaign for Democrat Dean Phillips, a Minnesota congressman who's running for the Democratic presidential nomination, said it was not involved. The Phillips campaign said it found out about the call from a reporter on Sunday night and said any effort to discourage voters is disgraceful and an unacceptable affront to democracy. The potential use of AI to manipulate voters is deeply disturbing. This story today as well from the Washington Post. The artificial intelligence company OpenAI banned the developer of a bot mimicking long-shot Democratic presidential hopeful Congressman Dean Phillips, the first action that the maker of ChatGPT has taken in response to what it sees as a misuse of its AI tools in a political campaign. The super PAC called We Deserve Better had contracted with AI startup Delphi to build the bot. OpenAI suspended Delphi's account late Friday in response to a Washington Post story on the super PAC, noting that OpenAI's rules ban the use of its technology in political campaigns. Delphi took down Dean.bot after the account suspension. That reporting from the Washington Post. Well, candidate Congressman Dean Phillips today was at a Rotary Club meeting in Nashua, New Hampshire.
I'm saying the quiet part out loud, my friends. The country is saying they do not want Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Donald Trump, I think, is dangerous. I witnessed it firsthand. Joe Biden is a good man. He served our country, I believe, with integrity. But it is time for change. The country wants it. And I am on a mission to do two things. To ensure that Donald Trump is not reelected, I will be forthright. That's not animus towards people who support him, but it is towards the man. And with Joe Biden, he is not an electable candidate. Anybody who looks at the data, at the polling, can see for yourselves that he is going to lose. And I did not intend to go to Congress to be a sheep, to follow my party's line, to let them hold me in a narrow path because I wanted to be reelected time and time again. No. I did what so many of you in this room have done, what my father did. We stood up and we said, our job is to protect the Constitution, to represent the people back home and all around this country. And I decided, you know what? The president's not passing the torch. The people I called to enter this race, they would not do so. And if you want to meet the moment in this country, thank goodness we still can. So I came up here on October 27th with a $1,000 check. I'm 35 years old. Well, I'm a little older. 35 years old and born in the United States of America. And thank goodness that's how easy you make it. And I became a candidate for president of the United States. And I do so with the intention to recognize most of our country is center-right and center-left. I'm a Democrat who's going to tell you the truth. We have a fiscal irresponsibility problem. We also have a crisis at our southern border, chaos. It is the foremost responsibility of an American president to ensure our security. Why do we spend almost $1 trillion a year with the Pentagon to protect us while we allow thousands of people, most of them outstanding people, seeking the same thing that our foremothers and forefathers wanted? But it is a disaster. I will tell you these things because they're true. And I aspire to a country that starts young lives with a $1,000 account I call American Dream accounts. $1,000, it's $3.5 billion. Considering our Pentagon budget of $866, I think we could spare $3 billion. Endow every baby in this country with $1,000. On their apps, when they go to elementary school and high school, they will learn about investing. They will learn about fiscal responsibility, management, and also entrepreneurship. They'll watch their account grow. They can add $500 a year to it. As an incentive to graduate high school, as an incentive, you'll have about $20,000 to start your lives as young Americans. A down payment on a house, start a small business. Kind of a complement to Social Security in retirement. This is giving everybody a boost in the beginning of life.
Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips, also Democratic presidential candidate in Nashua, New Hampshire, one day before the presidential primary in that state. Star Tribune newspaper in his home state of Minnesota reports today that Dean Phillips told the Star Tribune Monday that if he ran as an independent or third-party candidate, he'd have to be paired on a ticket with a staunch Republican such as Ron DeSantis to effectively siphon votes away from Donald Trump. The third-term Minnesota congressman who's challenging the president said he remains committed to running for the Democratic nomination. However, if he loses and America is faced with a Biden-Trump general election rematch, Phillips left open the possibility of running on a bipartisan unity ticket under the banner of the centrist group No Labels, which is considering an independent ticket. That was from the Star Tribune. This is Washington Today. From the New York Times, President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris on Monday announced new steps to support access to abortion, highlighting an issue that has galvanized voters in the year since the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade. Ms. Harris traveled to Wisconsin as she begins a national tour focused on preserving access to reproductive health care, as Mr. Biden brings together a task force on reproductive health care in Washington. That was from the New York Times. Today is the 51st anniversary of the 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision, which had made abortion a constitutional right, and that was overturned almost 2 years ago, by the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision, sending the issue back to the states. Here's President Biden at the White House with his task force on reproductive health care access.
51 years ago today, in Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court recognized a woman's constitutional right to choose. Constitutional right to choose. The right to make a deeply personal decision with her doctor, free from the interference of politicians. I believe Roe v. Wade was right. I'm not supporting, they didn't support abortion on demand. It was Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade was the decision. And a majority of Americans agreed. But then a year and a half ago, this Supreme Court made an extreme decision overturning Roe with their Dobbs decision to rip away a constitutional right from the American people, which had never been done before, a fundamental right ripped away, important to so many Americans. A right that is vital to a country founded on the idea of freedom. I said on that day that Roe was overturned. The health and lives of women in this nation would now be at risk. And that has unfortunately proven to be true. They've been at risk. It made them at risk, put them at risk. Today, in 2024, in America, women are turned away from emergency rooms, forced to travel hundreds of miles to get basic health care in another state that may have a different rule, forced to go to court to plead for help. Thanks to the mothers of two in Texas, a mother of two in Texas who was pregnant with her third child. From her doctor, she received the news that no one wants to hear. The life of the child and her own life were at risk if she continued her pregnancy. But instead of being able to receive care from her doctor, she was blocked by the state of Texas Attorney General and the state Supreme Court. Think about that. As she and her family were going through the frightening, heartbreaking ordeal, she had to fight extreme politicians in the court. They turned a deeply private and painful matter into a public matter. She ultimately had to leave the state to get the help she needed to protect herself and her ability to have more children in the future. The cruelty is astounding.
President Biden at the White House at a meeting of his task force on reproductive health care access. He also called on Congress again to pass a bill that would codify the Roe v. Wade decision protections for abortion rights. And he said if they do, he would sign it into law. President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris plan to hold a campaign rally in Northern Virginia on Tuesday on abortion and reproductive rights, their first joint appearance at a 2024 re-election campaign event. Mike Pence, former vice president and former Republican presidential candidate, spoke about the Roe v. Wade anniversary on Saturday at the National Pro-Life Summit in Washington.
When the Dobbs decision came down, it was extraordinary. Some 50 years of heartbreak, 50 years of loss, 62 million lives lost. And yet because of the persistence and the faith of many of the people gathered in this room with hair the same color as me, we sent Roe versus Wade to the ash heap of history. But it wasn't the end of the fight, it was the end of the beginning. Yep. And I really do believe that from this point forward, every single one of us has to resolve that we are going to work every day to elect men and women to every office in the land until we restore the sanctity of life to the center of American law. That's what it'll take.
That's right. That's right. And sign up at Students for Life Action's table to help do that this fall. Okay. In your view, now I have a list, but this is what I do at 2 a.m. I make lists. What is the first things a pro-life president should do if elected in 2024 as soon as they come back from inauguration? Like that day, first time sitting down at the Resolute desk.
I think that our new president should direct the new attorney general to suspend all efforts to harass pro-life activists in America for standing for the sanctity of life. And then, frankly, I think they should pull the abortion pill off the market and demand that the law is properly enforced. I mean, and the foundation I created has been involved in this. Students for Life has as well. I mean, under the Obama administration, that abortion pill was approved by end running the process that exists in the FDA to protect the health and well-being of the American people. And I believe those are two urgent causes. And I think we ought to step forward and make that happen on day one.
Like it. Let's sign a letter and demand it.
Okay.
All right.
An interview with Mike Pence, former vice president and former Republican presidential candidate at the National Pro-Life Summit in Washington, a one-day training day for activists, and it's hosted by Students for Life. The White House National Economic Council Director Lael Brainerd talked today about President Biden's economic agenda at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. She said that the president's advocating place-based investment, and it's designed to improve the economy in places that saw declines from previous policies, often called trickle-down.
Businesses chase low taxes, low wages, often non-union labor, resulting in an exodus of unionized manufacturers from regions like the Midwest. In those communities, tax revenues dropped, resulting in an erosion of local public investment, and then communities too often fell into a downward spiral of disinvestment. Those trends were exacerbated by the China shock, which by some accounts wiped out nearly 1 million manufacturing jobs. Take Milwaukee's 30th Street Industrial Corridor. There you saw during the Great Migration, Milwaukee's black population multiplying. By 1970, more than 40% of black residents in this industrial corridor worked in blue-collar jobs, a rate that was higher at the time than Detroit. And many of those families got jobs that enabled them to join the middle class. But then manufacturers moved to other regions or other countries, and Milwaukee lost nearly half of its manufacturing jobs. Redlining exacerbated the effects on the 30th Street Industrial Corridor, and those forces didn't just hollow out communities, they actually hollowed out the middle class. The president came to office determined to grow the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. That means investing in the communities that were left behind by trickle down. It means investing in the workforce and infrastructure. It means providing incentives to encourage businesses to invest in areas that had been disinvested. It means supporting small businesses on Main Street. Many economists agree that place-based policies punch above their weight in distressed communities. They can build more resilient, productive, and innovative communities and revitalize places like Milwaukee or Allentown, Pennsylvania. The president's economic agenda combines targeted investments in industries such as infrastructure, clean energy, and semiconductors with economic and community development policies that are reaching communities that were previously left behind.
The White House National Economic Council Director Lael Brainerd today at the Brookings Institution. She went on to talk about this place-based strategy guided by 6 principles. 1, well-designed public investment in local communities is a force multiplier for private investment and growth. The second, there are special incentives to encourage private investment in communities that suffered from disinvestment. Third, special programs are designed to connect left-behind communities to nearby areas of economic opportunity. Fourth, she says our programs help support science and innovation clusters all across the country, not just in a handful of major metro areas. Fifth, many of these programs are designed to lift up the priorities of local communities as opposed to being a one-size-fits-all top-down approach. And finally, she says we have learned that it is most effective to take a whole-of-government approach to working with localities by stacking investments. You can find the full program with Lael Brainerd at our website at cspan.org. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 138, NASDAQ up 49, S&P up 10. And the headline at CNBC, Dow rises more than 100 points to close above 38,000 for the first time ever. Washington today continues in a moment.
Hi, this is Rachel from C-SPAN's podcast team. I'd like to introduce you to one of the producers here at C-SPAN, my colleague Sean.
Thanks, Rachel. If you're a fan of Washington Today, we think you'll also like our evening newsletter, Word for Word, which brings you a recap of the day's most important political and policy events delivered right to your inbox. Read about what happened on Capitol Hill and at the White House, and watch video highlights featuring the day's newsmakers. Hear them word for word.
Join our community of informed listeners and viewers. Head over to cspan.org/connect and subscribe to Word for Word today.
Thanks for listening and staying connected with Word for Word. Subscribe now at cspan.org/connect. Thank you.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. President Biden putting out a statement. Jill and I are mourning the tragic deaths of two of America's finest Navy SEALs who were lost at sea while executing a mission off the coast of East Africa last week. Over 10 days, the United States military conducted an extensive search and rescue mission. Recovery efforts are still continuing as we grieve this profound loss of our country. The SEALs represented the very best of our country, pledging their lives to protect their fellow Americans. Our hearts go out to the family members, loved ones, friends, and shipmates who are grieving for these two brave Americans. Our entire country stands with you. We will never fail to honor your service, their legacy, and their sacrifice. That statement from President Biden. The SEALs went missing after a raid at night on an Iranian ship on January 11th. A U.S. official says the ship had parts of ballistic missiles and cruise missiles from Iran that were heading to Houthi militants in Yemen. At the White House briefing today, the spokesperson for the National Security Council, John Kirby.
I'd be remiss speaking about the field of battle if I did not also point you to the president's statement today acknowledging and mourning the death of two Navy SEALs who were killed while conducting an interdiction operation in the Gulf of Aden, trying to interdict munitions and weapons that we believe were heading from Iran to the Houthis in Yemen. It underscores how dangerous the mission can be, and the dangers that these brave warriors are willing to face every day. And I think as we all go about our day, we ought to just take a moment to remember that a couple of families are just got the worst news possible. And it's important that they know that the President and the First Lady will stay solidly behind them and their families, make sure that they get all the support they need. And I know that the same sentiment has been expressed to them from the Defense Department and from the Navy Department.
John Kirby, Strategic Communications Coordinator for the White House National Security Council at today's White House news conference. U.S. Central Command says the 10-day search for the Navy SEALs covered more than 21,000 square miles and has now moved to a recovery effort. John Kirby also got a number of questions today about Israel's war with Hamas. The Times of Israel writes that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pushed back Saturday against a report that he told U.S. President Joe Biden he had not ruled out the creation of a Palestinian state. The rare statement put out by Netanyahu's office on Shabbat came after CNN, citing a person familiar with the conversation, reported that Netanyahu told Biden that the public comments he had made a day earlier, in which the prime minister appeared to reject the idea of creating a Palestinian state, were not meant to rule out that outcome entirely. Back to the White House briefing and John Kirby.
John, I just wanted to go back to the president's comments from last week about there being a number of types of two-state solutions and referencing the idea that a number of UN members don't have their own military. Is it the president's current view that a Palestinian state that's demilitarized is the most viable outcome here?
I won't get ahead of where we are in the process of trying to achieve a two-state solution, Trevor. It's the president's view that a two-state solution is the best path forward for people of Gaza, for the Palestinian people as well as the Israeli people. And as he said in those comments, there's a lot that can go into creating what that construct looks like. And when we say two-state solution, what does it actually mean? And there's many different interpretations. There's lots of different ways you can get at that ultimate solution. And the president, as he has always done, kept an open mind about trying to pursue that. Now, he's also under no illusions of how difficult it's going to be to get there, particularly with this conflict going on in Gaza. So we're going to keep the discussions going with our Israeli counterparts. We're going to keep talking about it with Mahmoud Abbas. We're going to keep talking about it with our counterparts in the region in the hopes that more progress can be made. One significant milestone to help us get there is is trying to pursue normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which we still believe is possible. We were working on it very hard before the 7th of October. We're still working on it hard. And we've got, positive feedback from the partners in the region, including Saudi Arabia, about pursuing that. That could open up additional opportunities to try to get at a reasonable two-state construct.
Is the reporting accurate that the president has floated that idea in his last call with Bibi Netanyahu, and that it's something that he's sympathetic to?
What idea?
A demilitarized Palestinian state.
I won't get into the specifics of the discussions that the president is having with the prime minister. I think he was very clear with all of you about how he views the ultimate path to a two-state solution and the need for some flexibility in how you describe what that looks like. But again, it's going to require leadership on all sides in the region as well, and it's going to require leadership there to also be willing to look at it the same way that the president is.
John Kirby, Director of Strategic Communications for the White House National Security Council at today's White House news conference. A Reuters report from Jerusalem and Gaza reads that Israeli forces advancing deep into western Khan Yunis in Gaza's bloodiest fighting of the new year so far stormed one hospital and placed another under siege on Monday, cutting the wounded off from trauma care, Palestinian officials said. Back in Washington, this from Politico, bipartisan border talks are largely done and have advanced to the Senate Appropriations Committee, signaling talks are entering a potential final phase, according to lead Democratic negotiator Senator Chris Murphy. Our work is largely done, he said. The conversation has really moved over to appropriations, so there's no reason why we couldn't begin consideration this week. Murphy said that bill text is not yet finalized, but noted we need to give people the ability to read and understand the deal before a vote. He added that both caucuses have already been briefed on the outlines of what we have agreed on. Senators will want to review the bill and potentially propose amendments, but the process for that will ultimately be up to leadership. Republicans conditioned further aid to Ukraine on the inclusion of border policy changes as part of the White House's $106 billion national security supplemental request for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. That was from Politico. Senator Mitch McConnell, the minority leader, Republican from Kentucky, spoke about this on the Senate floor.
This week, Senator Langford and several colleagues continue their work to finalize the most substantial border security policy in 30 years. This agreement would come not a moment too soon. Over the past 3 years, we've watched the flood of illegal immigration tick past 6.7 million encounters. 6.7 million since President Biden took office, and an especially alarming surge just last year. December reportedly saw the highest monthly total for border encounters on record. The president's open borders have meant booming business for the cartels who specialize in trafficking humans and smuggling drugs, and far harsher realities for American communities grappling with lethal fentanyl and the thousands of people who have died trying to cross. This is a crisis, whether Washington Democrats are willing to call it one or not. The American people recognize what CBP and ICE are up against, even if their commander-in-chief does not. And the entire world understands what's at stake here in the Senate in the coming weeks. America's national security begins with securing and maintaining our borders. It's a matter of basic sovereignty. But we're also a global superpower with global responsibilities. We're facing serious linked challenges on multiple fronts. And once again, that's reality, whether or not our commander-in-chief acknowledges it. In Europe, our closest allies and trading partners are one border away from facing the brunt of naked authoritarian aggression. And it took months for the Biden administration to grasp the urgency of that threat. America's allies look to us to lead by example, to deliver decisive capabilities to Ukraine, and to step up investments in upgrading our arsenal and expanding our capacity to stock it. But for months, getting the administration to authorize lethal capabilities to help beat back Putin's escalation was a little bit like pulling teeth. And for years, the administration's defense budget requests have failed to demonstrate willingness to take the threats we face seriously.
Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, the minority leader today on the Senate floor. The majority leader of the Senate, Democrat Chuck Schumer of New York, also talked about U.S. border security and aid to Ukraine.
Over the weekend, Senate Democrats and Republicans and the White House continued negotiations on the National Security Supplemental. We've come a very long way since talks began 2 months ago, and Democrats remain committed to working in good faith on reaching an agreement. President Biden has also made clear he's willing to work with Republicans in a big way on border security. All of us on the Democratic side are serious about getting something done. I remained in contact with the negotiators throughout the weekend. We remain hopeful, but it's certainly not a done deal yet. There are a handful of issues that have not yet been agreed to. On something as complicated as the border, it's not just what we do that matters, it's how we do it. So negotiations are not done yet. Nevertheless, Democrats remain serious about finishing the job. Senators don't need to be reminded about what's at stake in this negotiation. The future of the war in Ukraine hangs in the balance. The security of our Western democracy hangs in the balance. The safety of our friends in Israel, our partners in the Indo-Pacific, and more humanitarian aid for innocent civilians in Gaza all hang in the balance. Ukraine is already running low on armaments and munitions that were in large part provided by the United States. A mere month from now, the tide of the war could turn greatly in Russia's favor, to the detriment of the West, in all probability for many years to come. If America comes up short, if we abandon Ukraine in their fight against Putin, the consequences will reverberate for years. Make no mistake, Putin will not be satisfied with merely taking Ukraine. His military influence in Europe will expand westward. The cost to NATO to hold Putin at bay will increase greatly. And if we fail, our adversaries in Iran and North Korea and in the Chinese Communist Party will conclude that America no longer has the resolve to defend democracy in its hour of need. They have always bet on the fact that we would lose resolve. Well, on our side, here on the Democratic side, we're not losing resolve. We want to get this done. And we know a good number of our Republican colleagues want to join us. We hope there'll be enough. We cannot afford to go down a dark and ominous road where we abandon Ukraine and the consequences roll before us. The eyes of the world are watching closely what we do and how we respond. Sadly, it's clear there are some in this Congress and beyond who wish to prevent bipartisan action on the border and on our national security challenges. Whether they're blinded by naked partisanship or cowed by political pressure, these minority voices are cynically working to stymie bipartisan cooperation. In the Senate, both sides must make sure these voices are in the minority.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, today on the Senate floor. New York Times reports the Supreme Court sided with the Biden administration on Monday in a dispute over a concertina wire barrier erected by Texas along the Mexican border. The justices temporarily lifted an appeals court ruling that had generally prohibited federal officials from removing the wire. Supreme Court's brief order gave no reasons, which is typical when the justices act on emergency applications. The vote was 5-4, with Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett joining the court's 3 liberal members to form a majority. That from New York Times. Russian President Vladimir Putin, writes Newsweek, has signed a new decree relating to Moscow's historic real estate holdings abroad, a move interpreted by ultra-nationalist bloggers as a foundation for future revanchism against Russia's neighbors and even the U.S. The decree signed by the president late last week allocates funds for the search, registration, and legal protection of Russian property abroad, including property in the former territories of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. This would include Alaska, swaths of Eastern and Central Europe, large chunks of Central Asia, and parts of Scandinavia. That was from Newsweek. Question about this today at the State Department briefing with the Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel.
Putin apparently today signed an order declaring a 1983 sale of Alaska to the United States as illegitimate, quote unquote. Do you have a response to that?
Let me just understand that he signed something today that said the sale of Alaska is illegitimate.
Right.
Well, I think I speak for all of us in the U.S. government to say that certainly he is not getting it back.
State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel at his news conference in Washington. The U.S. National Archives website reads, in 1866, the Russian government offered to sell the territory of Alaska to the United States. On March 30th, 1867, the two parties agreed the United States would pay Russia $7.2 million for the territory of Alaska. For less than 2 cents an acre, the U.S. acquired nearly 600,000 square miles. By the way, Tsar Alexander II was ruling Russia at the time. Finally, from WSB-TV in Atlanta, the King Center announced that Dexter Scott King, the youngest son of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, died on Monday. He was 62. Family members say that King died after a battle with prostate cancer. In Washington, on the Senate floor, LaFonza Butler, Democrat of California.
Just last week, we honored the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on what would have been his 95th birthday. Today, misfortune touches the King family again with the passing of Reverend King's youngest son, Dexter Scott King. America will forever be indebted to the sacrifices of the King family, and our prayers remain with them in this challenging time of loss.
Senator LaFonza Butler, Democrat from California, today on the Senate floor. In 2003, C-SPAN 2's Book TV covered Dexter Scott King on his book, Growing Up King, an intimate memoir.
I always think of the fact that people compare my father to so many great icons, but I would like to think of him first and foremost as Daddy. To me, he was just simply someone I could seek refuge in. And I think that the book was for me a great opportunity to get some of these issues out on the table, to look back over the span of years and explore the rich legacy that I'm very proud of being a part of. And the fact that he was a very serious person in public, the public man that we all know, but yet in private, he was very fun-loving, very playful. In fact, I saw him more as a playmate than actually a father. He really enjoyed having fun and playing with his children. We didn't get a chance, unfortunately, to spend a lot of time, quantity time, but quality time we spent was very memorable and enriching. So I talk about these many experiences that I will always cherish, but I also deal with the fact that at a very young age, this great tragedy that struck America, that struck all of us, affected all of us in some way, left a very deep-seated feeling of incompletion. So the book, in a real sense, helped me to bring this tragedy full circle, because my family really had not dealt with my father's death in a real substantial way. In a real sense, we followed my mother's example of strength and nurturing. She was very courageous and stoic at the time of my father's death. So we really didn't get a chance to grieve, if you will, and we moved on with our lives. So as an adult, a young man, I began to realize that there were some issues that I had not quite resolved.
Dexter Scott King, talking about his book, Growing Up King, an intimate memoir, in 2003 from C-SPAN 2's Book TV. You can find the full video of this event on our website at cspan.org. The King Center announcing today that Dexter Scott King has died at the age of 62. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. It's free, and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.